Okay, principal, colleagues, family of Chris Speed, students, guests. I'm Chris Breard. I'm the principal of Edinburgh College of Art at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to Professor Chris Speed's inaugural lecture. Chris Speed, as many of you will know, is Chair of Design Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. He has a BA in Alternative Practice, that's interesting, at Brighton Polytechnic, a Master's in Design from Goldsmiths, and a PhD from Plymouth University, working on digital architectural practice. He joined Edinburgh College of Art in 2008 as a reader. He's now, of course, Chair of Design Informatics, and his research focuses upon the network society, digital art and technology, and the Internet of Things. He sustained a critical inquiry into how network technology can engage with the fields of art, design, and social experience through a variety of international digital art exhibitions, funded research projects, books, journals, and conferences. I got into trouble with Chris at a previous lecture because I said he exhausted me with his productivity and his energy, but I stick by that. He exhausts me in a good way, a very good way. He received the University of Edinburgh Chancellor's Medal for Community Engagement in 2011 and was awarded the Royal Society of Edinburgh Innovators Prize in 2013. And his stewardship of Design Informatics, which is such an innovative collaboration between the School of Informatics and Edinburgh College of Art, it really is a pioneering example of transdisciplinary interaction. When I was about to come and join Edinburgh College of Art in the summer of 2011, an advance party of former colleagues, well, a former colleague, Alan Murray, and Chris Speed, came to visit me at the V&A. They were the first that came down, and the energy they displayed, and Chris in particular displayed, talking me through a whole variety of potential projects, really convinced me this was the right university to come to. So I've always been thankful to Chris, and I know he has the same catalytic effect on many colleagues. I was going to say emetic effect there, Chris, but I won't. That would have been a terrible slip. Anyway, tonight, true to form, he's going to give an exciting, playful, multimedia, risky lecture, I think, titled The Random Lift and Other Algorithmic Stories. So, Professor Chris Speed, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Chris. I don't know about the audio levels. You're at the high end of the something collider, because this might all go wrong tonight, or it might go right. It's somewhere between a bar mitzvah and a wedding, isn't it? Inaugurals. There's no big, grand theoretical overtures tonight. I'm just going to have some fun. Some of you haven't seen the work I've done in the past, and some of it actually is perennial. It just keeps going, and it just keeps manifesting in different forms. So the idea was to be playful and to offer you different insights, really. The way I'm going to do it is, let me reveal, is a pain in the ass, as it were, because it's going to be complicated and it'll probably go wrong. What I'm going to do is, once upon a time, I installed a random lift button in the University of Plymouth in a new build. And the random lift button is going to be live, and I've got a very good ex-student, let's go, if I can call him. Oh dear, now he's so suddenly gone, how do we do this now? How do you call? Call, there we go. And Chris is going to stream from his phone, from the random lift button. And it's going to take us, wherever it takes us. Hello, Chris.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Right.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, there's Mike, old friend. Now, the random lift button is in the Portland Square building. And poor old Chris, he hasn't got a camera. He can't see you, he can only hear you. But whenever I've overdone this. I decided to do 6 talks, 6 10-minute talks. And they're all there on the desktop. And depending where the random lift button takes us, you will get probably 4 of the talks. Yeah, or the same. No, so the first deal in this algorithmic adventure is if we do repeat, we'll ask Chris to hit another floor. All right, that's the deal. But if we don't get to another 2, then we don't get there at all. So, and I'll just to explain the setup. Why I didn't know how you do this then was a chance to go back and look at pivotal talks, which I'd given in the past, really. Pivotal because they became the first series of a keynotes where I'd figured out something. If that makes sense. You know what it's like. You always do a little, you do a talk, and then it makes sense. So these are the talks. And one of them is when I intervened into that man's inaugural. That's you. Yes, that's you. Another one will have been in Siena. It's going to be very distracting. Paris, Liverpool, Perth, and when I was 21 when I was at Brighton doing alternative practice. So based on where the lift takes us, I will literally jump to these different talks, and they remain on the desktop. So let me just escape that one. Right, Chris, are you ready?
Cool, yes, I can hear you. So we're just waiting for the lift to come back down again so we can press the button.
Super, thanks very much. So, yeah, Chris is just running a mobile. He's going to run actually Skype, and we'll see where it goes first. The random lift button, as you see, I will unpack it in the entropic navigation talk, but essentially it was installed during a brand new building. We were lucky enough, the Vice-Chancellor at the time thought there should be an interdisciplinary centre. So it's 3 tower blocks, if you like, with a whole host of different disciplines. Okay, right, so let's see where we go first.
Here we go. Hopefully the connection holds. And if we press the button.
Number one, okay. Thank you, Chris. You go to mute and take a seat, and I'll get on with the first talk. Whew, right, so far so good. Now, the problem is, having done so many of these, it's very hard to rehearse all of these because you don't know when the punchlines come and you don't quite know what you're going to start with. But I will start with this. So it's quite nice to start way back. I went to, I have to do this in 10 minutes. So I've got to be, okay, let's get, okay, 20. Yeah, I went to the college at Poly. Remember Polytechnics? Fantastic things. I went to Brighton Poly. And at Brighton Poly, I chose a pathway, a fine art pathway called alternative practice, which allowed me to meddle. Alternative to painting, printmaking, sculpture. It was the alternative space where you'd plug in videos and you'd feed them back into things. And early Apple Macs were around. So, and fax machines, remember fax machines? They were my currency, they were my platform. So I used to use them to explore, I suppose, a series of questions. Early questions, critically for this section, were about the planet Earth, though. The geography of being in a place which, in the end, it's impossible to reconcile. It's very hard to tell you which way. It might be very hard for you to point to London, actually. It might be very hard for you to actually point down to New Zealand, because we hold this cognitive model of the world as a flat map in our heads. Or worse, now we have it as a flat map on a mobile, which actually I think makes it even more complicated. So what I would do is things like such as this. I would send a fax, and I developed a strange love affair with Sally and Anna in the Falkland Islands tourist office. Don't ask me why it was the Falkland Islands. They would just answer a fax. Would you take part in something? And I would fax them things like this. This is a fax, and when the instructions, when Sally and Anna would go outside and they put a pen through the hole and then orientate the shadow to the shadow line, they would know exactly which direction I was in, based on my father's help, who's a mathematician, and using spherical geometry would help me figure out which way people were in the world. So we would agree at a certain time, and I think it must have been, I guess a time GMT, we would run out, and that's me standing on Brighton Beach waving at them. And we agreed to these bizarre telematic exchanges. And that extended even further with developing these international fax lines. And I would send a bunch of all these fax numbers to these faxes from people. This is the Montreal fax. You can sell the dot, and it tells them how far apart they were from each other. And all these people built To some extent, and this is me, my conceits, there'll be a few conceits tonight, a form of a social network, a crude social network. For that moment and that time, they were connected, albeit in a bizarre manner, imagining where each other were. And it extended into a model of something more three-dimensional, and the small mathematical theme kept going with a tetrahedron. There's a small tetrahedron, there's terribly bad photographs, and it's suspended and held in the planet. And I used 4 monitors. You can just about see the 4 monitors there. And you jump onto the platform, and you could look through, using corrective perspective on the monitors, you could see through the Earth in this kind of form beneath your feet. And it meant sending these bizarre devices to different people, which are kind of flat pack points of the tetrahedron. So this is the Tokyo one. It ended up at a male artist in Tokyo, and he was happy to put it into his flat, take a photograph of it, install it, orientate it. It has a compass underneath it, so he could orientate the tetrahedron point to the right direction, and it, in the end, constructed this tetrahedron within the planet. So again, very spatially explorative, particularly trying to think about where is the other? Where is the other with all of us? And just where are they in our lives? The last piece, and it's shocking to realize how we couldn't take photographs in 1992, personally. I was just trying to dig this stuff out. This is the final piece, which was the first Apple laptop generation. Allowed me a chance to use HyperCard out in the quad of Brighton Poly. And inside the box is held in gimbals, so it could move in any way like the old compasses. And in there is a laptop, and on the bottom of the laptop is a joystick which is upside down. So it meant that when the gimbals moved this way, the joystick would move that way because it had a lump of wood on the end. So it was an upside-down joystick, but that allowed the pointer and the cursor to move around the screen and reveal the underside of the planet. So it became a periscope for looking through the planet. And it was, I haven't got any pictures of what it looked like. It was built in HyperCard, and then we threw up a Friotto kind of rip-off to keep it up from the rain. Now, these are all about really, whoops-a-daisy, trying to explore, again, this geographic problem that we have. What is it to be connected to the other through communication, but not understand where they are and what that situation might be like? And this gap, the gap will come up later, is very interesting to me, because it's a gap that I think keeps us in a human condition of where we don't really understand the other. This is then CoMob, so a good 18 years later, when the iPhone suddenly adopted GPS, the iPhone 3 for me, suddenly allowed myself to play with a woman called Jen Southern, who's a GPS artist. And we developed the application CoMob Net with Jochen Enes, who's now down in Singapore. But he wrote a nice simple application that allowed us to connect people online, live. And when you jump onto CoMob Net, you simply see a line between you and people in your group. And it turns out that people have been downloading it for the last 5 years. They just keep downloading it. And they have the most intimate, peculiar relationships. And we began to track some of these relationships. Some of these relationships involve truckers. They seem to involve skate kids, judging from the name of the groups. This is all a hypothesis, really, because we don't really have Apple don't let you get very close to people in the end, which is probably comforting for many. But what we did do last year is got in touch with Liz. And Liz is a lovely woman. She's 75 now. And she just keeps in touch primarily with 2 boys, 2 sons. And these are some of her, well, this is her portraits from 2009. And what's happening is I've obfuscated the ground so you can't see where she lives. But I don't think that matters. What will matter is this quality of this line and some of the things she said about it. And she does it every day. It's the first thing she clicks on. So she gets up in the morning, turns on CoMob Net, and the boys know this. Like, she calls them boys, so I'll call them boys. And they jump online. And there's no other communication. They don't text, they don't say, "Hi, Mum." They just passively connect to her. And what they do is she talks about this astonishing kind of knowing, this connection, which is only afforded from a simple line across a simple map. And what you begin to see are these very peculiar, we call them portraits, of just the odd lines. And it's very fast. And on a daily basis, you can see sometimes they won't go in, sometimes they do. You'll see these very strange little kind of jumps as they move around each other. Having said that, there's not one happening. And then sometimes other people will come in, and I think it's a daughter-in-law, and you get these very delicate connections. So these are some of the things I'm absolutely fascinated with, and it's a very, very simple piece of work. We keep trying to make it more complex, but it doesn't need to be. It seems to embody for Liz a connection, a sense of something bonded more than just an idea of a social network, but something which keeps them very, very close to them. And for her, who's becoming more immobile, this little piece of technology is allowing her to travel to quite complex spaces. One of the sons is a pilot and works out in the Middle East. So he often travels, you'll often get a line that goes right off the screen. And it's her only way to keep in touch with him. And the other one is a roadside recovery chap. And you get this lovely idea that she also begins to imagine what he's been up to, which is great, because you know then that she's going somewhere through this very, very simple line. So that's part one. Oh, no, it's not. Right, so this is the problem we haven't rehearsed. So these connections are critical. Now, what I wanted to do, since these things have got even smarter, is recover some of these. Some of these ideas that we started out with in Brighton. So what I'm going to do now is, with the help of Jochen, who helped develop, let me go here. And I can go live. There's CoMobNet, and we'll see if anyone's in, just for fun. Sometimes Jen's in with me. Oh yeah, there she is. So Jen, who's developing, she's down in Lancaster now, which is kind of nice. So that's all you get. It's a very nice, simple relationship builder. But the one I wanted to show you was something Chris Barker and Sigrid have been working on, which is really a recovery of the periscope. So you won't understand this experience because you're not holding the phone. But what I'm doing now is looking right through the planet. Because, of course, I've got a gyroscope in here, and I've got maps and GPS. It knows precisely where I am on the planet, and although I can spin the iPhone, I actually keep a sustained look. So straight down there, for me, is New Zealand. And if I come around and travel up, where should we go? Through Asia, perhaps? It's quite disorienting. Oh, there's Eric. That's one of your friends on Instagram. And now it is very hard work, because that's Anchorage, so that's Alaska. And over here, we can move over to as what you know to be the East Coast. And of course, I seem to be traveling west. But this is all the time traveling through here. So you keep this very peculiar relationship. And I thought I dismissed it entirely. But I took it out of my pocket recently, and someone said, oh no, that's great. Because I can see when I travel where I've come from. And I know I've come through as much I've come around. So, that was the end of part one. And now we'll try and go to the lift again, and we'll see what the next journey is. Now, I'm not... Chris, are you ready to go again? He's asleep.
Yes, we are ready to go.
Fantastic.
Here you go. So, back up we go.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not sure what you do with takeaways like this. As I say, you're not going to get everything. You're going to get some of this. But these are some of the things that I hold dear to my heart. The idea is three. Right. Okay, that's good. That's all about the lift. Okay, let's jump to entropic. Thank you, Chris. Right, so this is... so another particular idea, well, actually the title of the lecture is all about this idea of what happens when we start investing in algorithms. And actually, don't get worried. You're doing it all the time. When you cross roads, when you turn machines on, it's okay. And we've been living with rules and systems for a long time. There is a lot of paranoia at the moment, and I suppose I wanted to burst a little bubble about that, because it shouldn't be something we worry about. We just have to take control and think about how we might design them. So the entropic navigation talk was really all about the random lift button itself. This is where I used to work. I came out of Brighton. I did a PGCE, because it was what do you do after a fine art degree. But actually the skills I gained in Brighton about multimedia development led me to be able to work in Wardour Street and develop those stunning CD-ROMs that none of you bought. And they all ended up being coasters. Do you remember? Fantastic things. But we worked on a bunch of things, serial killers and animals and all manner of things. But what was patently obvious about working in industry was that the lifts are quite strategic. There is code in a lot of buildings which are to guide the cars up to the top floors. In fire situations, they'll travel up to the top floors and get the most important people out of buildings. The algorithms that run them are part of a question I've got about what other systems have we got playing through society. And in this particular building, which was Marshall Cavendish, I would go in through the building, just the door just there, and be faced with the lift straight in front of me. And the priority was to get to work as soon as possible. We don't have a lift here, we have a set of stairs. The best place to have a chat was the stairwell. And at the time you could smoke in buildings, you could hang out in the stairwell and get all of the gossip, get all of the promotions and get all of the cool jobs. And the lift was an antisocial place. So it became quite an interesting problem that actually, as I came to the building, I wasn't really experiencing a 5-story building in London. What I was beginning to experience actually was a 1-story building. So I might chat with the security guard, but in general you wouldn't. They would change. You didn't build any relationship with them. I don't know if that was purposeful, not like here. But here you would go straight in and get to the 4th floor where I worked. So it struck me as we had the opportunity to develop a contribution to a new building, it seemed only natural then to develop a random button. And as you can see, you've seen the live version. This is a poor student at the time who volunteered to be buttons. And why you do that, you regret doing these things. If you can't photograph, the worst thing you do is put friends in button outfits. It doesn't garner things. But this is the button. And actually what's happened is it was all about really time-space compression, reading Harvey's ideas of reflecting on postmodernity and really understanding what it is to be within a 4-disk system, to be absolutely tied to that. And that was part of the Masters in 1999, particularly to talk about the implications of the network society and Castells and so on and so forth. But more recently, I've looked at it again. I haven't travelled in it again. And it's began to remind me what the role of artists are, because the role of artists are very useful algorithms within society to throw entirely different ways of working and living as perhaps one metaphor or one way of understanding them. And Sophie Cowell, as you probably know, is a terrific person who's done that. We've used her work, actually this piece of work, which is La Visite Guidée, where she was actually asked to intervene into a museum with unusual objects which had stories, rather than many of the other objects which we have to guess who used them hundreds and thousands of years ago. So I'm going to play you 2, and the latter one will demonstrate the type of algorithm which I think she's offering. So I need to set this up. What you'll need to go to now is a thick French accent, and you'll have to do your allo allo kind of recovery to understand her.
The bed. It was my bed, the one in which I slept until I was 17. Then my mother put it in a room she rented out. On the 7th of October 1979, the tenant lay down on it and set himself on fire. He died. The firemen threw the bed out the window. It was there, in the courtyard of the building, for 9 days.
So that's what you get from Sophie. And it's the style of thing, the artifact you see in the museum just gains entirely different values, entirely different stories, which for Tales of Things, if it pops up later, you'll understand what resonance it made with a large project we pursued with Jane and the team. But it was the next one, which actually I think when you listen to it, it's comical, it's a bit strange. What you're listening to is an algorithm. And I think what you're going to hear, I want you to think about, may well be how you're going to live and pursue some of your futures. Because what she's doing to this poor chap is quite exciting, but also unnerving. And I think that's what we're about to experience as we move and invest further into personalized algorithms.
The time. I saw it for the first time in December 1985 at a lecture I was giving. I found him attractive, but one thing bothered me. He was wearing a necktie. The next day, I anonymously sent him a thin brown tie. Later, I saw him in a restaurant. He was wearing it. Unfortunately, it clashed with his shirt. It was then I decided to take on the task of dressing him from head to toe. I would send him one article of clothing every year at Christmas. In 1986, he received a pair of silk grey socks. In 1987, a black alpaca sweater. In 1988, a white shirt. In 1989, a pair of gold-plated cufflinks. In 1990, a pair of boxer shorts with a Christmas tree pattern. Nothing in 1991, and in 1992, a pair of grey trousers. Someday, when he's fully dressed by me, I would like to meet him.
And I think that's it. It's soft, it's playful, but it's deeply disturbing. I mean, when women start sending you, or anyone starts sending you things through the post, but they have a perpetual sense of observation and relation, that probably may well be what it's like. Now, do you want to go there? Because it's quite tantalizing for a moment, but it does require a different type of investment. Now, we do this sometimes. This is what we've been playing with, and I guess the piece that I'll draw up now is the work done with Duncan Chingleton for the Future Everything Festival this time last year, where really we wanted another action to be deployed through a kind of algorithm. What CoGet does, it's another iPhone application, I know. What it does, it pretends that something's got to get somewhere with the aid of you, but without the need of any carbon or anything extra. So what happens is, and I come out of Haymarket every day, so I'm going to use this as an example. It looks across all the people who might be running it. So this people may be running it. This is actually in Manchester where we did the demo. All the people are running it, and it looks at all of their trajectories. And it says, oh, this person's got the bearing and they're heading that direction. This one's got a bearing and they're heading in that direction. And it looks at those, and the teddy bear, perhaps, that wants to move across the town, who's got legs, but they don't work, it says, I could piggyback those routines. So all it does, the algorithm just looks out and says, I know, I'll head down that path and bump into this person down there. And knowing your histories and knowing your trajectories, it then builds likely paths, and a teddy bear or any inanimate object is able to move across a town by simply asking you permission to piggyback your journey. And it's an algorithm. It means that you live into, you end up moving through spaces. You can see some live shots there from different people as they move across the city. But it changed entirely the way that people in Manchester felt about the street. It meant that everybody around the next corner of every road could be a potential for a social connection. And think what you'll do tonight when you leave here. Nobody around you will have a social connection unless you know them. And the street isn't a social capital resource. It's an entirely antisocial resource waiting to happen. If something emergent happened, then maybe it might happen. But what was lovely, all of these people did change behavior, and everybody had a possibility to meeting somebody new. So it's a type of, again, it's another algorithm, but it's a nice way of beginning to think about what we try and do in Design Informatics. Play with the code, offer disruptive opportunities, and think about the implications for a different navigatory or social systems. Great? Okay, I'm doing okay. Right, Chris, can we go for number 3, please?
Okay, let's go for the button.
Oh, the anticipation. Oh, it's ground. Okay, all right. Let's go ground.
Awesome. I think somebody's called us. We've gone 4th then ground, so...
You've gone, okay, it's ground, is it?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going ground. It's hard work. Now, you just can't put a story together here. You just have to take those away. But I think that's part of the work we do as well. So in 1999, I was finishing off the master's course at Design Futures, which is a really innovative course that particularly tried to talk about, are there futures? Can we talk about futures? And this was a small piece of work we performed for BT and Martlesham. And they were interested, what would you do if you had lots of web? And we began to position, I think, which was an early form of Web 2.0, social media. What happens here is that if you go to Google now, you can imagine going to Google now. I might just stop it just to explain this. Sorry. Oh, where's my mouse gone? If you imagine just going to Google now in your head, how many people do you think have got the same browser window open? I mean, it must be thousands have got that window open now. But how many can you see? You entirely solo. Now, all the Google servers know that they've got 1,000 people looking at that same page. And yet there's no social interaction whatsoever. And it still hasn't changed. Back in 1998, the late 90s, you used to have something called MetaSpy, which would allow you to see what people are literally searching in real time. And it was a terrific social insight, and it was a clue to Raindance. So all that Raindance did was it would mine how many people were looking at that website, were active on the server, and throw them into circles. And it would simply expand a circle according to the amount of people who were in there. So this is I had to dig this out of the files last night, so it's not live anymore because it runs in something called Shockwave. But what you'll see when we jump into Raindance is that's the server. That was a live server running. But every web page, every place on it, simply the diameter of the circle was simply according to the amount of people who are visiting it. And it's dead easy to map. All you're doing is counting IP addresses who are live hitting it. And it very simply allowed BT to begin to start seeing what a social media might begin to look like in 1999. So it's very, very early stuff. Now, the expansion and the contraction of the things were also part of perhaps my interest in human geography at the time as it grew through what we now call and know to be the spatial turn. And it led to a number of movies through the early noughties which really wanted to expose and make clear this production of space, which is of course social, of course it's economic. And although the architects and Fiona and Remo will think it's all about building things, of course they realise it's nothing to do with that. It's all about the clients who want to build space. So this is Muttley Plane, and myself and the wife, we lived nearby, didn't we, Stephanie? We're kind of close to here. And this is Muttley Plane. Muttley Plane, while Plymouth was bombed entirely through the Second World War, the whole city decamped to this really long drag, this street. And on it they have everything. Banks, boots, bars, everything you think of, medical centres. Sorry? Everything being, yes, thank you, Steph. And what I did very, very simply was to ask 4 characters where they went. So just like the social media deployment of Raindance, we began to see here that Drew, who's a young student, these are the places he went to. And all we did, rather like the homunculus man character you might have seen in cognitive science, shrunk and grew certain parts of where he visited regularly. So you can see he does go to the big bars there, but he doesn't go to some of the other centres. This is Mormor and Martin, young German family, just moved to Plymouth. An entirely different landscape opens up. Places in which the Swarthmore, which is a learning centre, was very vivid for them as they learned. They all took part in English language lessons. But other places, the bars, just simply shrink. So this is another way of beginning to explore this perennial concern I've got that for everything, every act we make, every project that Design Informatics does, there's a high social parameter to it. It was followed up soon after by a further movie, is it going to come? Which was Space Labs. And I'll skip a wee bit along here because I'm aware of time. And Space Labs particularly looked at, this time, one particular part of Muttley Plane, but wanted to understand the occupation activity of people. So rather like we hit the websites as though they're houses. And in this, all we did, we set up a 24-hour video. Dead easy to do with early webcams and machines. But what we started to do was I hired a bunch of students, and they simply counted how many people visited those shops. And what happens is you begin to find out things such as the post office gets a good footfall per hour, compared to the charity shop, which actually travels much less in terms of wear or tear. You can imagine the carpets in some of these places having a great deal of decay. There was a disused shop in the space, which is also interesting, as though there is this time, this fallow time in the high street where things simply aren't getting used. And what would the representation, I can't use it, was then simply to replay that. So for a moment here, what you begin to now see is actually a temporal representation of a space which is never in time. All of you are rotting at entirely different speeds. And any idea that somehow we're held together just isn't tenable. We all have entirely different chemical systems and aspirations and stresses and anxieties that make this, I've got to go in 10 minutes or I'm okay sitting back listening to Chris go on. So these ideas of cities became, a temporal space of a city became quite active. But it was deadly frustrating because it could never be live. It was really frustrating at the time, and I just couldn't get them. They always had to be video conceits in some ways, which was always very frustrating. So I was lucky enough in 2002 to get a residency in Auckland as an artist in residence in a little university called Unitec. And Unitec, the art blocks, is actually, for want of a better term, a mental hospital. 19th century, not very nice, quite terrifying for a fine artist to be put into a cell. And that's literally what they were, quite scary. You saw the padded bolts holes on the wall still, and it was quite a sinister department, personally. But it was very territorial. In fact, it looked as a plan view rather like this. And you would have photography and fine art and viscom and architecture and sculpture in different wings. And they're highly, although the architecture was quite interesting to play with, it's highly antisocial form of space. But we all knew the students slept together. They played together. They learnt together. Highly social. So the question was, how on earth do you contest this architectural plan, which was all over the place? It was on fire escapes. It was an idea of organising the staff and the teams. It just wasn't working. So one way to do that was to begin to ask questions about what they were borrowing in the library. So what I did was, there's a live, this is more live, it's not live anymore, went to 100 rooms across there's about 100 rooms there, and asked people in their rooms, could I borrow your library card number, please? And stupidly, they gave them to me, way before data protection. And I also asked them, what are you studying? And they would tell you, exactly, down to, I'm studying, I don't know, French architecture in the 19th century, particularly the late, they really tell you what they're studying. And it's very easy then to recover a Dewey number. Remember Dewey numbers? I think they're old hat now. And then begin to then build a system that allowed us to find out what they're really borrowing. So all of the rooms then get allocated the Dewey number for their subject, but it turns out they're not borrowing at all what you think they're borrowing. Because it turns out when we ask them and inquire in the system, all of the rooms, so the first thing the model does is takes away the people who aren't studying or aren't reading books within the 700s of arts. And then the second thing it does, it moves all of the people around to find out what they're actually studying. And it turns out that the fine artists are studying architecture. There's a lot of architects looking at photography. There's a lot going to theory. And you begin to understand that this is maybe a little bit like the Space Labs, a little bit like the Places of Difference videos, trying to articulate that maybe the things that you see out there just aren't the way that we organize them cognitively or politically or institutionally. And when I came back to Plymouth after residency, I wanted to pursue it again. I think it was less successful, but the building we'd moved into was so dry. And yet Plymouth was full of such interesting architecture, the campus. So here what happens is everyone who sends an email in real time to someone who's occupying those two flanks of the building get a brick. And what happens, they can't very see it in this light, but on the bricks is a JPEG of where their office comes from. So from Moray House, you can imagine Moray House graphics appearing on the side of Evolution House where I work. So we're beginning to say that architecture, again, isn't a thing you see. It's part of the world and the way you live in it. Now, I've got to speed up a wee bit now. And then more recently, that social work particularly set up some of the politics, I think, which have informed the very proud work I've done out with Alan and Ewan and people, Caroline and Roy, all out in Wester Hailes, where we had AHLC funding to explore how on earth we break some of the representational problems of Wester Hailes. Again, a tough area which has been through some hard times. And you'll find pictures of Jane when we took out great pictures of the past, pictures from when Wester Hailes had to work very hard to find themselves a community. So they built the huts, they built the benches, they ran fun runs, terrific memories which were all documented through the Sentinel newspaper. Again, another self-build project. And what was really fun was by recovering these pictures and placing them on our little shed, you would get people coming for making beelines straight across that shopping centre. So the woman there just staring at the fun run picture, what she's doing, she's identified these two chaps, the two young chaps, 388 and 492, and said, that's my boy. And that's his best friend. And they're still here. One's a carpenter, and one's a plumber, and they just still buy it. And she then whipped open her wallet and said, look, that's them there. And it was the most amazing moment, and we began to find that this, not a nostalgia, a little bit of a nostalgia, because there were good times. And after various governments and policies have dismantled some of the infrastructures to support social, I suppose, activism, they do remember the good times. And what's happened since is that the teams met, we facilitated, but I think absolutely they drove this through with the help of Whale Arts. They developed what then became the digital totem pole. There's Alan, he's here somewhere, doing a terrific job selling this bizarre object, an object that would have QR codes over it to allow them to recover memories, to allow them to write memories, and this is it being carved. And it was amazing to put something in the ground for £40,000. Just, I mean, for the teams that did it, just an astonishing idea that you can get something in the ground through planning. But again, a lot of help. Diggers were on site building the living centre, healthy living centre, who helped dig out the hole. So it was a great sense of achievement. And then to finish on this particular episode is this idea that what it does now, and I was uncomfortable at the poll because I wasn't sure everyone was using QR anymore. I mean, we're not, are we? But it turns out that the poll has acted as quite an important figurehead of something that is happening virtually. The same level of activism which had happened through the fun runs, which Caroline had documented so carefully through the Facebook page. And what she does here is so very clever. Every time she posts an old picture of the good times. And then immediately afterwards, she'll post something that's happening now. Just a terrific temporal design work, just keeping everyone remembering and then acting in the present. And it's been so very successful. So much so that they've now set up a digital sentinel. We've helped build the website, but they've got a whole bunch of reporters, the folk with T-shirts on, and they've gone on to develop this really fascinating site. And it pushes out more data than my team do. I mean, there's 3 or 4 news posts every single day. People who are unemployed, people learning English, improving language skills, and they just want to be involved. And it's been a terrific, and I get this message every night now at midnight of the posts that go out every day. And it is a terrific credit to the community, and well done, Alan, and you, and if you're here. Right, now, what's the time? It's 6 o'clock now, Chris. Shall I do one more? What do you think? Do one more. All right, one more. Okay, right, Chris, we're going to go for one more.
Okay, one more. You missed some
Spin the wheel of... 2. Oh, hey. Right, that kind of helps. Thank you, guys. Right, the plate spinning. So, now, once upon a time, when was it? It was very cold in Paris, and I was giving a particular talk about what it felt like, increasingly in a network context, to actually invest in and experience Napster. I don't know if you use Napster. Did you steal from Napster? You didn't steal with, you stole with Napster. And it gave me a whole bunch of opportunities to talk about temporality. And it meant getting to Paris, and it meant on stage hiring a plate spinner. And he came over in the channel, and he just made it by literally minutes. And he set up, and I then allowed me to explore an idea of, I've been, again, very dear to my heart, which is this idea of temporality, which Michelle has superbly helped recover with so much more grace as well. But this is what multi-temporality felt like in the late 90s. It felt like watching things, traveling at different speeds. And if you use BitTorrent now, you still know that the seeds and the servers, it is a shared space which its latency is based on highly personal social positions. Machines in rooms, individual machines running at different speeds. Now, the interest in time has been pretty perennial as well. This is embarrassing from 1997, where Mike Phillips had funding to pursue a number of research TV shows. Now, see, I was slimmer. It's amazing. It's true. I did look like that. Now, what I was doing at this point was, again, trying to explore the very easy slip between Cartesian splits of time and space and demonstrate how useless that is. And it might be an imperial document, actually. You see it every night, because actually, it would be better to do it with a clock.
However, although the cloud will try and resist, toward the end of the day, we'll see this at the end of the day, become a full brain bank, and in fact, into the early hours of the morning. Now, that was the traditional model. What I'm going to try and present now is an alternative model that, again, reflects perhaps some of the stresses and strains that new media is put on to those similar or traditional vocabularies. Okay, we can see now at 12 o'clock a wonderful sunlight is raining down in the southwest and indeed across most of northern Europe. However, moving toward 2 o'clock, although the sun is going to last for a couple of hours, as we move towards 4 o'clock, the clouds are going to start moving in and we're going to start to see that wonderful part of the day move away.
Now, the same time, excuse the pun, was all about this idea of what it is like to concentrate on a number of things at the same time, but also be in different times. It involved various experiments up the A38. The A38 between Plymouth and Exeter allowed me to try a particular experiment, which was to find the right speed for driving. Now, the law says 70 is the right speed, the appropriate speed, but actually I've discovered through various experiments at high speed that 83 miles an hour is the better speed to travel at, because 83 miles an hour averages out to be 60 miles an hour. And if you can travel consistently at 60 miles an hour, you know when you're going to get to places. So you actually stop panicking and you find yourself traveling at appropriate speed. Not 90, I know 83 feels fast, but I know you do it. That actually traveling at 83 is way safer, or so at least the studies showed. So other works include the looking clock. The looking clock is a clock that only works when you look at it, kind of in the name really. But it was particularly interesting because I was worried that these clocks tick in the background and they become dominant and they tick, tick, tick. And whenever you look at them, you get that panic and think, I've got to be somewhere. And what might it be like to have a clock that didn't insist you should catch up with the world? So what happens in the looking clock is, as the camera will come into view, there's a chap just over here who's going to come into the view of that sonar, which is the black dot. And as he does so, the microprocessor will have recorded how many seconds has passed since he last stood there. And as you see what it will do, it will throw all of the seconds into the second hand and take us to the present. Any second now. There we go. So he's just moved into the view of the camera, the sonar, and it takes us to the present. A much more relaxing way of beginning to negotiate catching up with the world. Or as Sarah Sharma might talk about, recalibrating with the world. It was also beautiful because it was also the first clock that seemed to have ghosts. In other words, you could see the time and you knew when someone else had been there before, which is a nice idea of presence. Again, related to other ideas of... You're right there, Pete. And of course, this throwing me into the more contemporary situation of the now is Edinburgh. And it's been fascinating coming to Edinburgh because, of course, we're surrounded with all these multiple temporalities, these spaces and places, and of course, people. Just what do you think people are doing when you pass them in the street? Where do you think they're going? What stresses or strains or objective do you think they're performing? But satellite technology has changed us as well, and we're beginning to look at the times of places when we open our Google Maps. If you look now at Google Earth, you don't know entirely what time the base map was taken. In fact, Google distort this. For the Beijing Olympics, the Beijing committee paid to have balloons go over the bird's nest to make sure that you could appear to be in the present when you're on the base map. So, of course, you never know what the time of the map is. And this led to the work with Ian and Carlin and Pete and Dave, there they are, thank you, and Margaret and James and Petra and Peter and Tim. And so where we began to just take maps from the National Library of Scotland and throw them over a Google map. And it was very successful. It seems to still be a very popular application, downloaded many times, and it allows now me to walk in the Nor Loch on a regular occasion. So just finishing up now, the last project which I can feature tonight is working with Larissa and a whole bunch of people, including Michelle, on the time of the clock and time of the encounter, where really, I think, working with Larissa has been an absolute pleasure. Just to set the scene, we were very interested in what it is like to be with the clock and live with that moment of encounter, which perhaps, like the looking clock, is a moment of uncertainty or play. What happens here is we give out a whole bunch of IKEA clocks and a bunch of cameras to students at 2 schools. One in North Queensferry, which my son took part in, and a lovely school down in London. And all the kids then give you back the most extraordinary insights to the world as they give you photographs for the first time with time and clocks in them. And you begin to understand what they do. But what, of course, is important is the data stamp, that the time acts as a data stamp for all of those photographs. And very cleverly, what Larissa organised was a way of beginning to then work together. So when all the kids bring back their pack of photographs, all 400 of them, were able to go into the school hall and then begin to organise them. So all of the kids, what they're doing now is organising all of the different photographs according to the time. So on one side of the room, we start at 7 in the morning. On the other side of the room, we finish at 10 o'clock at night, depending on when some kids go to bed. And what was lovely is all of the children broke apart all of their personal photographic packs to develop this very elegant, very simple journey of what it is like to be in a shared social time. And you found out that some kids did karate on Saturday mornings. Some people played football. Some just stayed in bed watching TV. But they really enjoyed these extraordinary exchanges. What Larissa then did was she uploaded those to a database, a temporal database, and as the kids wanted to tell the time, they couldn't know the time now. It would literally print the time of the past. So what those kids are doing, they're hanging around, pulling the clock, and it prints out a photograph from those albums, but it prints it on time. So if Eric was doing karate at 10:30 on a Saturday morning, it would tell him the time, but through his own photograph. So it's a very complex but subtle way of remembering that we are connected as a school group. The last piece was the time box, which I think is equally as elegant, and again, Larissa takes full credit on this, is how on earth do we share time? What is the speed? We're not all speeding up. We sometimes get stressed for being slow. So how do we explore that with a bunch of children? What we did was we asked them to write down 5 speeds of the day on a separate piece of paper. And then we built a series of robots that would reenact that time. So this is the time box at North Queensbury Primary School. So what happens is after filling out a little timesheet, whether they are, lost it now. It's hard work. But that was the point of the thesis, that you can't keep it all together, that humans struggle to sustain these temporalities. So these are the bots, and this is, again, Eric's class, where they'd already figured out the time of the bots, and they'd programmed them to be slow, medium, or fast. And here what you can see is they'd written down, and we'd ask them, what was their day like? Fast or slow? Could you tell us how it starts in the morning? And then they programmed each robot to repeat that. So it might be that you are a slow, slow, medium, fast, slow person. It might be your fast, fast, slow, slow, medium. And then they released them. And there was a lovely anthropomorphic moment when they realized that, of course, it was them traveling at different speeds. But then what was more beautiful was the chaos of the playground. You put them and release them, and there are the kids who just hang around and spin in circles. I mean, there's a little bit of a conceit here because the robots are struggling with, you get 15 motors and they don't entirely do what they're supposed to do. But there is the fast kid and there is the slow kid, and they're all carrying out different times and enjoying these entirely different paces. So that is the last one. You've missed 2. But we'll keep going, Pete, if that's all right. Yeah. we all want to see.
It's not going to happen.
Chris, thank you very much, Chris. We're going to move to questions now, so thank you for helping.
Excellent.
And a round of applause for Chris, who's in.
Wow. Crispy.